Thank you, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, excuse me. I hate to interrupt your conversations, but if you don't mind, I think in the interest of time, we're going to get started with our program. Please continue to eat your meals. Out of courtesy for our speakers, I would ask that you please take your cell phones and iPhones, please take a moment and just put them on silent mode, or please turn them off until the conclusion of the program. So, good afternoon. My name is Roy Nascimento. I'm President and CEO of the North Central Massachusetts Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of the Board of Directors, our staff, it is great to see you all here today, and I'd like to officially welcome you. It's great to be back in person, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we established this program a little over, I think, 6 years ago as a forum for our members to connect with our elected officials in Congress, to hear from them about what's happening in DC that's impacting both our businesses and our communities here in North Central Massachusetts. And it's great to see this has grown every year since we've done it, and it's great to see such a great crowd here today, especially after the unprecedented 18 months that we faced with COVID-19. So thank you all for your participation. This is so important on so many different levels to come together with our congressional delegation here on them. So thank you. I would like to express our thanks to our congressional delegation, U.S. Representative James McGovern of the 2nd District and U.S. Representative Lori Trahan of the 3rd District for their commitment to participate every year in this forum and engage with local business leaders. And I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to acknowledge and thank our sponsor who helped make today's program possible. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our corporate sponsor, Fitchburg State University. We are very grateful for their support. They stepped forward over 6 years ago to be the founding sponsor when we launched this program. Their support reflects their dedication to our communities, their commitment to the Chamber and our members, and their support of civic engagement. You'll hear from Dr. Richard Lapidus, President of the University, in a moment. But again, I'd like to ask for another round of applause just to acknowledge and thank their support. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank our friends at FATV who are here today. You'll see them in the back. Thank you so much for being here. We're recording the program, and it will be airing in Fitchburg and in neighboring communities. And again, I want to extend my thanks to them. And at this time, I'd like to take a moment to highlight some of our special guests. We have some elected officials who have joined us here today, in attendance today. Let's see, we have Senator John Cronin is here. Thank you, Senator. Senator Jamie Eldridge is here. Thank you, Senator. We have members of the House of Representatives. We have Representative Meg Kilcoyne is here. Representative Mike Kuzmarek is here. Representative Dan Seen is here. We have Paul DiPaolo from the Governor's Council is here. We have our mayors. We have Mayor Stephen DiNatale of Fitchburg. Mayor Michael Nicholson of the City of Gardner is here. From the City of Fitchburg, we have Councilors Marissa Fleming, Bernie Schultz, Sam Squalia, and Beth Walsh. And from Leominster, we have Councilor Frank Ardinger. From our towns, we have Orlando Pacheco, who's the administrator for the town of Lancaster. Thank you, Orlando. Town Administrator Andrew McLean from the town of Pepperell. Stephanie Latin from the town of Westminster. Sorry if I butchered that. And Justin Schultzbach, town administrator for the town of Winchendon. And we also have some members of the select board. Margaret Scarsdale from the town of Pepperell is here. And Steve Wallace, town planner for the town of Westminster is here. And I apologize if I missed anyone. That's all I have on my list. So if you're an elected official and I missed you, I apologize. So at this time, I want to draw your attention to the forms on your tables. There should be cards on your tables. If you have any questions for the question and answer portion of our program, Representatives McGovern and Trahan have graciously agreed to answer questions from the audience. So please, if you have any questions during the program, take a minute, fill that out. We'll have members of the staff going around, just raise it, they'll collect it, and then we'll have them answered. So before we move on, I'd like to introduce our sponsor, Fitchburg State University, and President Dr. Richard Lapidus. Dr. Lapidus is, I believe, in your 6th year. Is it sixth or seventh? 7th year. Time flies. At Fitchburg State, and has helped lead many of the important partnerships between higher education and the business community. Please welcome Dr. Lapidus.
Thank you, Roy. It is really nice to be here, and thank you for joining us today. It's nice to be back out a little bit, unmasked, and I suppose if you think about it, the silver lining to COVID, I guess, is it taught us a little bit about how important sort of social interaction is, and I suppose also how fragile human beings are as we take a look at all the cases of mental health that are popping up all over the place. So thanks for coming out today, certainly. As Roy mentioned, this is the 6th time we've done that. Congressman McGovern, I guess, is the veteran here. We've done it all 6 times. We started with Congresswoman Songus for a couple of years, and now Congresswoman Trahan. Is this year 3 for you? Third year, yeah. So again, thank you for coming out. Certainly both of them have been big supporters of higher education in Fitchburg State, and we certainly appreciate you taking the time to come here and share a little bit of your insight. As far as the university is concerned, we are open for business and operating as we always have in the past, I guess, plus the masks and the daily COVID testing. But other than that, the campus, I'm pleased to say that campus community is nearly fully vaccinated. Students were very excited to come back and were willing to take health and safety seriously, and that was an important decision for us in opening the campus. And since we are so centrally located within the city of Fitchburg, it was important that we made sure that we weren't going to create some sort of a crisis by bringing them back. But they are back, and they've been highly compliant, and we're excited about that. And then as our cycle goes, we're already starting the open houses and recruiting for fall of 22. So if there's a desire for a degree or a second degree, open houses start on Saturday, and then there's also one on the 30th and one on the 13th of November. So if you or a family member or a friend have a desire to come out and take a look at the campus, we'd be happy to show you around. Normally, Roy, you give me a time frame of about 2 minutes. I'm probably already over. But just quickly, I guess I try to share sort of a priority project every time we do this, and our priority project for the university is working with the city and others to enhance the downtown theater district. We purchased a significant property on Main Street and are working diligently to try to bring back, if you're familiar with the Main Street, there's a 1929 vaudeville theater that we would like to bring back to its original form. We think that will energize what's going on Main Street. Significant activities already happened down there. If you've been to the new City Hall, which is great, and some of the other properties. So I do want to thank the mayor for his work in helping us to get that theater project going, as well as Senator Trahan and Representative Kuchmarek have been really key players in helping us to move forward. So thank you all for that. And then I believe my job as president is to always try to sell something. So let me just sell one quick thing, and that is student internships. The university prides itself in what we would call applied or authentic learning. It's great that students have the opportunity to go to classrooms, interact with faculty, read books, learn theories, but the reality is that they really learn when they have an opportunity to apply the work in some practical sense. So if your organization has a project that perhaps you don't have the personnel to fully implement, or like an opportunity for some students to give a different perspective than perhaps your own, an opportunity for an internship, an in-classroom project, anything that you could share with them would be beneficial. And we know certainly talking to employers that internships are a great way to sort of, at a low expense to you, sort of test drive the labor market, and oftentimes wind up hiring students for entry-level jobs. So I'd ask you to consider that. So again, thank you all for coming, and we look forward to the insights from our Congress folks. Thanks. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you again, Dr. Lapidus. It's now my pleasure to welcome today's MC. From Fitchburg State University, we have the Director of Public Relations, Matthew Brune, who's going to serve as our MC again. So please welcome Matt.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Roy. It's a pleasure to be back here again today, and a pleasure to see so many familiar faces back in person. Civic engagement really is very important for make sure the voices of our business community are heard by our delegation, and I'm glad to see so many people are taking advantage of that opportunity today. As you know, we're honored to be joined today by two members of our delegation who I'd like to introduce now. Currently serving his 12th term in Congress, Congressman Jim McGovern serves as chair of the House Rules Committee, which sets the terms for debate and amendments on most legislation, and is a member of the House Agriculture Committee. In 2014, he was named Democratic ranking member on the House Committee on Agriculture's Subcommittee on Nutrition. The subcommittee's jurisdiction includes policies and statutes relating to nutrition, including the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and domestic commodity distribution and consumer initiatives. Congressman McGovern has successfully advocated for increasing Pell Grant funding for low-income students struggling to afford college, expanded the Land and Water Conservation Fund program, and secured millions of dollars through appropriations process for the creation of a Wounded Warrior Service Dog Pilot Program. Before his own election to Congress, McGovern spent 14 years working as a senior aide for the late U.S. Representative John Joseph Moakley, former dean of the Mass Delegation and chairman of the House Rules Committee. He was born in Worcester, the son of two successful small business owners, and welcome, please, Congressman McGovern. Now serving her second term after being elected to the House of Representatives in 2018, Congresswoman Lori Trahan currently serves on the powerful House Committee on Energy and Commerce. She has played an active role in securing federal designation of the Nashua River as a scenic waterway, introduced legislation establishing laws aimed at preventing another tragedy like the Merrimack Valley gas explosions, and filed legislation addressing the opioid epidemic and supporting career readiness programming in public high schools. Part of the vaunted Pink Wave, the largest female caucus elected to the U.S. Congress to date, the Congresswoman holds the distinction of being the first Portuguese-American woman ever to serve on Capitol Hill. Prior to her election, Trahan served in Congressman Meehan's office, the same office she now holds for nearly a decade, rising to become his chief of staff. She went on to take an executive post in the technology sector before co-founding a woman-owned and operated consulting firm. There, she provided client companies advice on business strategy and steps they could take to ensure staff success, with a particular focus on female employees. The daughter of working-class parents, she was the first in her family to graduate from college, attending George Mason University on a volleyball scholarship. Welcome, Congresswoman Trahan. So thank you again both for making time today.
It's great to be here.
So as we said, we'll be taking some questions from the audience. There's forms on the table, so chamber staff will be collecting those and bringing those to me here.
I wrote one to say, like, why are we so lucky to have those two great Congress people, but Laurie told me don't do it, so.
Coolly played. Yeah. So I guess we'll start. I'll start with you, Congressman McGovern. Infrastructure. Looking at the proposed infrastructure bill, what are the pieces that you believe will have the greatest impact on residents and businesses of North Central Mass?
Look, we have an aging infrastructure here in Massachusetts. We're an old state. We have bridges that are older than most of the other states in the country. I have lots of bridges in my district that are in disrepair. I have lots of roads that are in disrepair. My district goes from Worcester out to the Pioneer Valley. And I can tell you firsthand that these roads need repair. I need a chiropractor to go back and forth sometimes. But the bottom line is it costs money. Cities and towns don't have the funds on their own. The state has limited funds as well. So without a federal match, without a federal commitment, things don't get done. And so, in addition to our normal appropriations bills, which will provide money for cities and towns in the state, this bipartisan infrastructure bill is working its way through the Congress right now. And there'd be in Massachusetts alone, there'd be $4.2 billion for roads, $1.1 billion for bridge replacement. It'll be all based on formula funding, but it will make a real difference. A lot of projects that have been on hold for years will all of a sudden be able to be completed. And as a result, there will be countless new jobs as well. So it's working its way through Congress, but help is on the way. And I'm really glad that we're finally getting to a point where we're doing something real. I don't know about you, but I'm sick of infrastructure weeks and infrastructure months and infrastructure days. I mean, what we need is infrastructure money, and that will be coming your way.
Save you any particular projects you're hoping to see?
Jim touched on, I think, the most important is I look at so many of the towns that I represent here. Bridges and roads has been the bane of all of our existence in terms of that funding just being so overdue. So it is going to be a boon for Massachusetts, and over $5 billion just in bridges and road funding. One of the things that you've all heard me talk about is combined storage overflow. It has been in disrepair. The federal government used to grant those funds to cities and towns to make those water infrastructure upgrades. The bipartisan infrastructure deal makes a dent in that, but I have to tell you, one of the reasons why we talk about the Build Back Better Act when we're talking about the bipartisan infrastructure is because between the two bills combined, that's when we get the $2 billion per year for CSOs. We were able to put in additional language in the Build Back Better because we know that cities, especially Fitchburg, our gateway cities, they can't keep up with that investment. It's 100% federal match. And so that allows us to get in front of this problem and really make the investment so that we're not on a 50-year horizon. And then the only other thing obviously the investment in public transportation is so important to the North Central region. But broadband, $100 billion for broadband, which I know I've worked with so many on you on those dark spots in our community. So this is a really important bill, and getting it over the line has because the attention of everybody in Congress and certainly everybody in our cities and towns.
Are you both optimistic we'll get there?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Good, that's good to hear. So speaking of Build Back Better, the plan promises to create jobs, cut taxes, and lower costs for working families by, quote, making the tax code fairer and making the wealthiest and large corporations pay their fair share. Now, the scope of that agenda continues to be reimagined, but what do you think these projects will mean to your district, starting with you, Congressman, and where is this money going to come from?
Yeah, so I think the important thing to talk about when we are talking about the Build Back Better package is that it's paid for. And, you know, we have a system right now, just in 2010 alone, we had 55 corporations in our country who paid zero in taxes, while getting $3.5 billion in tax rebates, $8.5 billion that we didn't get to collect on taxes. I mean, that is a lot of money. And that is something that is just unfair in our tax system. And so, you know, I think a couple of things to just remember about the pay-fors in the Build Back Better plan, you know, increasing the corporate tax rate and the international tax rate is a big part of this. We'll deliver about almost $1 trillion to to pay for this package, as well as increasing taxes on people who make over $400,000 a year, another $1 trillion there. So you see that we're already at the point where we can start talking about investments in, by the way, our workforce. When we talk about paid family leave, childcare, universal pre-K, those are workforce initiatives. That's going to get more people back to work, women especially, who have had to leave the workforce in the last 18 months. They don't have a path to get back there because they don't have the support for raising a family and holding down a job. So I think this is an incredible package that is really going to right-size our tax system, but also create a more inclusive and a fair economy for us for the long run.
I agree with her on everything. Look, the tax code is not fair, and the burden is on those in the middle. And what we're going to try to do is, you know, is make it more fair. I mean, Laurie mentioned the fact that an alarming number of big corporations in this country don't pay any taxes at all. I don't think anybody's who in business here can say that they don't pay any taxes at all. The tax code is not geared toward you. Billionaires have gotten richer during the pandemic, and yet when you look at what they pay, when you add in the loopholes, it is at a significantly lower rate than everybody in this room. And so I have nothing against rich people or big corporations, but I just want them to pay their fair share. And if everybody pays their fair share, we can get a lot of things done. We can actually pay for the Build Back Better program, the physical infrastructure and also the human infrastructure. Roads and bridges are vitally important, but so are people. And so the second bill that we are all working toward is about investing in people. I mean, making child care more affordable. That will make it easier for parents, especially women, to go back into the workforce. You know, extending the child tax credit, which already has reduced child poverty by 40% in this country. We want to continue that. We don't want to reduce child poverty only to have it increase again if we don't extend it. We need to deal with the issue of the climate crisis. I mean, everybody says they get it now, almost everybody says they understand that we have to deal with the climate crisis. Well, that means we have to invest appropriately to be able to reverse the current trends. And also, you know, we ought to find ways to make sure that you know, we expand Medicare so that senior citizens can get dental coverage and eye coverage as well, and to try to make prescription drugs more affordable for everybody in this country. So that's the promise of the second bill, and our hope is that we can get a deal. It probably won't be as much as I want, I'll be honest with you, but it probably won't be as small as Joe Manchin wants. And we will come to an agreement, and we will move this thing forward. And I believe that both of them combined will be transformational. It will make a real difference in people's lives.
Thank you. So we're all still grappling with the impact of the pandemic and the disruption to global supply chains that resulted. The challenges really exposed the vulnerabilities of our country's dependence on overseas manufacturers. What policy steps would you like to see Congress take to support local manufacturers and encourage the development of good, well-paying manufacturing jobs back in your districts? We can start.
Yeah, no, I mean, one is we need to make sure that all this money we're spending at the federal level, that the contracts go to American manufacturers. And President Biden issued an executive order essentially calling for that. We need to you know, support organizations like the Mass MEP to help coordinate, interactions between the federal government and contracting and local businesses. We need to support our colleges and universities like Fitchburg State University, and we need to support STEM initiatives in our schools, so that we are producing a workforce that has the skills to be able to take on those manufacturing jobs. So there are a number of things that we need to do. The other thing I want to say that we also need to do, we can't forget this, we got to get this pandemic behind us. All right, we got to get people to get vaccinated and use their masks when it is appropriate, because if not, we're going to continue to have to deal with these upticks in the virus. And I think that's a major disincentive as to why people are not going back into the workforce quicker. So that has to be also at the top of the agenda.
The only thing I'll add is, we haven't actually been together in a room since the start of the pandemic, but like I'm sure all of you, I was appalled at our reliance on a foreign supply chain back in March of 2020, when we had so many of our healthcare workers and our essential workers going to work without basic personal protective equipment. It caused me and a bunch of my colleagues to start the Pandemic Preparedness Caucus so that we could kind of get at how do we bring manufacturing back to our country. Actually, I am not in a committee hearing at this moment that is addressing U.S. manufacturing and the incentives that we need to get those jobs back to the United States. But trust me, it'll be a 6-hour meeting, so when I leave, I'll be able to catch up. But there's a few things. We've filed legislation for a Biopreparedness Workforce Act, so we can have loan repayment programs for. We have a shortage of employees right now who are in public health fields or in biopreparedness fields. So those are expensive degrees, as you all know. We need to make sure we're attracting people and make sure we're paying their loans back so that we can continue to have a healthy pipeline. Another one is a bill that we're discussing today. It's on Made in America Act and making sure that we have a federal national standard for Made in America, so that the cost of manufacturing isn't just the burden of our manufacturing companies, right? The compliance to have to deal with a patchwork of state regulations is burdensome. It's burdensome to our manufacturing companies, also to our small businesses who rely on national distributors. That gets passed on to consumers. So we really do need to have a national standard. And I think the president is doing the right things in terms of incentivizing manufacturing to come back home. He also issued another executive order yesterday to help with the backlog that we're seeing in our ports, 24/7 shifts, making sure that we're increasing our distribution routes for FedEx and UPS. So the diagnosis is very clear, and I think we are being very proactive right now in terms of how do we make it so that it works for our manufacturing companies, our workforce, as well as consumers and small businesses.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the Enforcing American-Made Products Act. Can you explain how that would work, how that would be helping?
Yeah, so today, every state can have a different standard of Made in America. What constitutes Made in America today? And that is, if you could just imagine, and I'm sure you all can because you're business people, but the percentage of your cost, whether it's on legal counsel or compliance or cost of goods, that is really hard when you have different standards among different states to have to comply with putting a Made in America label on your product. It does warrant a national standard so that, one, it decreases the cost and the burden for our manufacturing companies who, by the way, are really looking for those incentives to bring, those jobs home and have their products made in America, especially in this moment. So making that easier, it's quite simple. There's really nothing more to it than that. But making sure that the federal government issues that Made in America standard. And by the way, this passed unanimously in the Senate. It was a bipartisan bill between Senators Lee and Angus King. And so I'm really hopeful that it's in markup right now in the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House, and we'll be able to pass it as well and make it easier for folks to know the rules of Made in America labeling, and that it won't be burdensome, passed along to small businesses and consumers.
No pressure, Congressman McGovern, but will you support that?
Absolutely, it'll come before the Rules Committee is done. It's going to the
I don't work
floor.
on anything he won't support because it has to go through him.
So I want to ask about the polarization of our society at this point. It's a theme that comes up every year here. When polls show a large majority of Republicans don't acknowledge President Biden as the lawfully elected president, how do we move forward with this kind of divisiveness?
It's really frustrating, we're all trying to figure out how to put the genie back in the bottle. But we're living in a time of great polarization. I'll say very frankly, I think the previous occupant of the White House contributed greatly to that, but it didn't start with him. I mean, it's been growing for quite some time. What is stunning to me is how easy it is to promote a conspiracy theory or just an outright lie, and how it has become easy to get certain people to believe in it. I mean, on the election stuff, it's stunning to me because judge after judge after judge, Republican judge after Republican judge after Republican judge, Trump appointed judge after Trump appointed judge, have basically dismissed all the cases that he and his allies have brought forward about the election. And yet, and they even hired this kind of cockamamie auditing company to do a new audit of the Arizona results, and it turned out that Biden won by a bigger margin. So they, I don't know how they did that, but anyway. But the point of the matter is, even that is not enough. I mean, there are people out there who I think now, no matter what you say, no matter what you provide them in terms of facts, are just not going to change. They're going to believe what they want to believe. We see that dealing with the pandemic. I mean, I had a guy in the supermarket who said, "I'm not getting vaccinated." I said, "Why not?" He said, "Because the government is going to inject a microchip in my arm and they're going to be monitoring me." And I'm like, why would the government want to monitor you? I mean, it's like, what is this all about here, right? But he believed it. I mean, I was the last person on the floor on January 6th. I came face to face with this mob. And that's when they shot this woman, Ashley Babbitt. And, I'll never forget it. And yet I've had encounters. I had an encounter in a supermarket where a guy said to me, what happened on January 6th didn't happen. That somebody had sent him a link, and that the videotapes that we saw on TV, including the one that I'm in, it wasn't filmed at the Capitol. It was filmed someplace else, and that the real footage of the Capitol proves that. And I kept on saying to the guy, I was there. And he said, no, you got to look at the videotape. I said, no, but I was there, right? I'm in the videotape. I would know whether I was in Washington or Hollywood, right? I mean, I know. And I couldn't convince him. He said, well, I got to say, I'll investigate. And I said, well, when you get to the conclusion, let me know. I remember saying to my wife, how did he get like that? And how do I ever reach out to him and get him, back into a conversation, based on fact? So, look, I think all of us have an obligation. This is not just a Washington or a politician thing. I mean, at family functions, at business roundtables, when people say things that are just blatantly not true, I think we now have an obligation to stand up and say, please don't do that. It is not true. As uncomfortable as that may be, we have to set the record straight. The other thing, which contributes to this polarization, is the way our political system operates. Too much money. I mean, we got to figure out a way to get the money out of politics. Gerrymandering. I mean, at some point we have to figure out whether or not we can create congressional districts where people choose their members of Congress and not members of Congress choose their voters. I think that would help, because some of these districts are drawn in such ways that it's not only all one party, it's all like one wing of one party. So there's the willingness for people to be open. And the other thing is, I think we have to, again, those of us in Congress have to deliver. We have to, because I think one of the best ways to end the polarization and to give people confidence that this system actually works for them is to deliver, is to deliver on our promises. to pass these bills that will help people. This is what we promised. And I think the more people can see that government is making a positive difference in their life, the more confidence they'll have in the system. And I think that will help contribute to lessening the polarization. But it is a huge problem. And I hope, let me just say one final thing. I thought after January 6th, quite frankly, that immediately after we were rescued and brought to a secure location, I thought when we returned to the House floor that we would all come together, similar to what happened after September 11th, where people stood, Democrats and Republicans, and sang God Bless America on the steps of the Capitol, and everybody across the country, no matter what your people gave blood, they all wanted to be helpful. I thought that was going to happen. And when we came back, it didn't. They still challenged the election results with no basis, with no factual basis, and it just divided people. I've got colleagues, and Laurie has colleagues, who were actually being protected by the Capitol Police, who say that it was just another day of tourism. I get pictures of them cowering in fear behind the Capitol Police, and they think there's some political gain into reinforcing this falsehood that nothing happened. It is really hard to deal with those people, I gotta be honest with you. When they're in an elevator, I usually walk. I walk up this, I get my steps in, it's good for my heart, but I'm afraid what I'm gonna say, right? And that's not a good thing. I mean, but I'm just saying, there's still a lot of unease and difficulty in dealing with people who will say that to your face after what we all saw in real time.
I don't have too much to add there. Everything that Chairman McGovern said is right on the money. And I actually did see Chairman McGovern in that holding room after he was basically the last person to leave the chamber floor. And it's a moment I will never forget. Look, I think it's the responsibility of every single one of us. Our leadership position in the world is not going to be determined by our military might. It is literally going to be determined by whether we can preserve our democracy. And that is actually all of our responsibility. There are a lot of outside forces right now at play. I think one area where Democrats and Republicans agree on the diagnosis, not sure about the prescriptions yet, but we're going to find out, is the role that social media plays. I've been a huge critic of big tech for a couple of reasons. One, on them targeting our young children when we know that it's harmful for our young girls especially. But two, for the engagement model that is social media, right? You have to keep folks on longer. How do you keep folks on longer? We learned all about this just by watching Haugen's testimony last week. You give them more crazy content, more conspiracy theories, more things that are going to say, I'm clicking on that. Because that's how they make money. That is exactly how they get to increase their profit year over year. And so we have to disrupt that model. We have to make sure that we are not brainwashing swaths of the American people because things are positioned as fact when they're not. And that's where a lot of people are getting their news today is, and it was worse during the pandemic because so many people were sitting in front of a screen feeling isolated, not being able to go out, and folks would be tired of watching either CNN or Fox News because that was divisive, and then they'd go to social media and it would be more of the same. And so I do think we have to ensure that we hold tech accountable for the role that they play in spreading disinformation and misinformation. And we also have to hold them accountable for embarking on our children to be their next growth frontier.
Clap for that.
It's the first one. I'll join it.
You talked about the shape of our districts earlier. With the 2020 census, once again, state leaders are redrawing congressional districts and cities and towns are being moved around. Do you have any concerns about how your respective districts may change when the new lines are drawn?
Yeah. I was joking, by the time I retire, I will have represented the whole state. My first district was Princeton to Dartmouth. We called it the Ivy League district. It included Fall River. Then I had a district from Worcester out to Metro West. Now I have a district from Worcester to the Pioneer Valley. Love every place I've represented. But, this is a state legislative function. We know that the state legislative maps have been drawn, and so all of my colleagues here look really relaxed, and they now know what they're dealing with. So I haven't heard anything of you. I mean...
No, I have not.
So
but rest assured that Chairman McGovern and I are going to work collaboratively to represent this region, just like I've had the pleasure of doing the last 3 years. And well, you've had much broader swath of the state over your decades of service. But yeah, I think it's one thing I will say is, it's been transparent and fair. We've had these hearings that started in the summer to give a forum to folks in the district who wanted to have their voices heard. Right now, I think we're in the middle of a listening session for the state Senate and the state rep maps, and I think in the next couple of weeks or sometime in November, we'll find out what the districts are for the congressional delegation.
And I think I speak for Laurie, whatever we get, we'll love every single city in town. What a gift, right? Yeah.
But you're confident the process is...
Yeah, no, look, I mentioned redistricting before and the gerrymandering. Actually, in Massachusetts, the last few times, I think my district, my Princeton Dartmouth district was gerrymandered. But since then, the redistricting process here, I think, has been pretty fair, and oftentimes has won bipartisan support in the legislature. I think ultimately we need to get to a point on the congressional stuff where you have independent commissions that draw the districts. And again, I have that's not a slight on anything that's happening here in Massachusetts, because what we're doing here in Massachusetts is not the same thing as what they're doing in Texas, and so, but I think nationally we ought to be thinking in those terms, because, I mean, otherwise you're going to have districts that are so narrowly drawn that there's no divergence of opinion at all. And you want members of Congress, whether Democrats or Republicans, to have to deal with a variety of opinions. So we're not just, of one view, that we're considering all views.
That's exactly right.
So we've got a few more minutes I wanted to get some audience questions in here, and make sure we keep time for you to meet with folks afterwards. So to pay for Build Back Better, you want to raise the corporate tax rate. That is not the reason, this is the phrasing of the question. That is not the reason that the largest corporations pay no taxes. It's their ability to utilize loopholes. Just raising corporate taxes will only hurt small businesses that can't afford to find those loopholes. How will you change that?
So I do think a section of the pay for is to have more IRS enforcement and to close some of these loopholes, right? You don't get, I think what I spelled out between the individual tax rate of people over 400,000 and the corporate international tax rate, that only gets you to, I think, 1.9 trillion. There's another bucket that constitutes another couple of $100 billion around tax enforcement and closing tax loopholes. And so I am, whoever pointed that out, I am mindful that people not paying taxes that's not the whole problem, and that's not where we're solely focused in terms of right-sizing the tax system. But I would also say that just raising the corporate tax rate up to 25% that was the corporate tax rate just 5 years ago, and we had a booming economy 5 years ago. So I think many of the benefits that we're giving in the Build Back Better, many of the investments that we're making in the Build Back Better Act are going to benefit our corporations, because right now it's no secret people are having a hard time getting folks back to work. We need to invest in working families so that they can afford their child care. I mean, you all know, if you're a mom in the room, I mean, you know this in your core. The child care providers don't make enough money to actually send their own kids to child care to show up to their job, and that's only gotten worse over time, right? So how do we have two parents in a household able to go to work when we don't have a child care infrastructure? I lived this one. My mom, the home-based care wasn't as much of an infrastructure as it is today. But my mother, she watched kids in our home because it was the only way that she could make money while she was raising my youngest sisters, right? I mean, this is when women can't afford to send their own kids to daycare to go to work, we don't actually have the support that we need to have a more participatory economy. And so I do think that, I just got way off of the corporate tax rate, but these investments are meant to bolster our workforce, which is, we are in such dire need of in this moment, and I think throughout our recovery.
Yeah, let me just say, I mean, the corporate tax rate and the Trump tax cut was lowered more than the business community actually said they wanted. So that's one thing. The second thing is, you know, I go to events all the time and people say, we need more money, you need to invest more in infrastructure. You need to invest more in healthcare. You need to invest more in daycare. Oh, and by the way, we need to do this, we need to do that. You know, why aren't you doing all these things? And then, when you start to propose these things, people say, well, how are you going to pay for them? And, you know, and that's always the challenge. How do you pay for them in a way that is fair, that doesn't undermine the economy? And I think there is a case to be made, closing corporate tax loopholes, slightly raising the corporate tax rate, are ways to pay for it that will not damage the economy, but also get us all these other investments. You know, I mean, you know, I was at an event yesterday. A guy came up to me and said, "Oh, you know, why aren't you worried more about the debt?" I said, "I am worried about the debt." You know, and yet we passed a tax cut under the Trump administration that benefited mostly people who are well off, and it was not paid for. It added $2 trillion to the debt. And, you know, during that debate, we had the debate, said, is anybody worried about offsetting this or paying for it? No, the debt doesn't matter. Now the debt matters when we're talking about investing in people and in infrastructure. And what we're saying is, okay, then let's find a responsible way to invest and to pay for it. And that's the balance we're trying to strike here.
Speaking of infrastructure, and there was an audience question about this, is high-speed rail, that's a concern in this part of the state, is that an area you see being invested in?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's in the infrastructure, in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, Senator Markey and I have a provision in there that invests heavily in increased rail service, including high-speed rail service. I mean, we want this east-west connection to happen. And then I used to represent Fall River. Who knows where I get it back at? We want the north, the south, the rail between Fall River, New Bedford, and Boston as well. But there is a significant amount of money in there for rail.
Yeah, it was his bill, so I wanted to give.
So another audience question. With the focus on workforce investments, do you anticipate any additional focus on improving the H-1B green card process, particularly for frontline physicians working under visa status?
Yeah, there is no question. And if you are working in a congressional office right now and picking up that phone, you know that a large part of what we do is constituent services. And it has changed dramatically in the last 18 months in terms of the cases and the calls that we're working on. But one thing that has been constant is our H-1 visa and our H-4 visa, which is the spousal visas for our H-1 visa holders. Look, this is the reason why, and this is the reason why immigration reform is so important, cutting out these backlogs, making sure that we're having an immigration conversation that quite frankly maps to our economy and solves many of the problems in our economy. And that is everyone from our farm workers and our Farm Worker Modernization Act, which we passed through the House, and hoping that it will also be included in the Build Back Better package too, on the high end, right? Making sure that we're able to attract the engineers and the medical staff that, you know, Massachusetts frankly uses for its growth. And relies on for its growth. So, you know, when we talk about immigration reform, I know sometimes it's so easy to just like, you know, maybe tune out because the headlines will depict the southern border and all this, you know, fear around what immigration is in our country. But I will tell you, we have to have a dialogue, a national dialogue about comprehensive immigration, updating our laws that haven't been updated in decades. Our economy is increasingly complex. Our needs are very much known in our country. And it is the humane thing for us to do rather than kick this can down the road for another second. So I do think that, one, we get it on the front lines all the time in terms of trying to help navigate the visa process and making sure we can help expedite where we can, those backlogs. But two, we just need a macro approach to this issue.
I just say, we need to, immigration reform, we need to streamline the process, make it easier. Immigration is part of the solution to some of the work shortage that many businesses are now faced with. But it's like, you know, it's the issue that is most demagogued in this country. Immigrants are blamed for everything. And you hear that all the time, and it's so unfair, and it's not based on fact. I mean, you know, you can't get into college, we're blaming it on immigrants. You can't get a job, we're blaming it on immigrants. You're having a fight with your wife, we're blaming it on immigrants. I mean, it's this constant blame game, and yet we are suffering economically because we have taken this kind of negative approach. And by the way, the issue now is not just streamlining the visa process, it's making people feel comfortable after 4 years of being bashed, that they are welcome in this country. And that's another thing that we have to deal with in the short term.
You know, I'm just going to say one more thing. I forget to tell this story, but I'm sure you all have something similar. My grandparents came from Portugal and Brazil, and my grandmother came from Brazil, moved to Lowell, worked at the textile mills in Lowell. My congressional office that I get to walk into every day when I'm home is in that mill. It is literally where I walk into work, where she worked, and when our country is at our best, that is actually what's possible, right? And I think that is the narrative we have to lead with when we talk about immigration in this country. And we really do, I think as much as we all have a role to play in the polarization of our politics, we also all have a role to play on holding up the ideals by which our country was built.
And a question from the head table, how did we get two such wonderful representatives?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that, Roy and Rich.
That was from Mr. McGovern.
That was my question.
One last question, I think it's probably ARPA related, but for communities where their roads might be in decent shape, will there be funds available for other municipal projects like fire stations and those kinds of investments?
Repeat the question. I'm sorry.
For communities that, for the infrastructure bills, for communities where roads are in decent shape, will there be funds available for other municipal projects like fire stations, for example?
And that's for the ARPA funds?
Yeah.
So I think we've worked closely with most of our cities and towns because of the guidance that was given in terms of the American Rescue Plan funds. And I can appreciate, because some of those were infrastructure investments, right? There was some guidance that was given that you could spend those dollars on like water, for example. That waiting for the infrastructure bill is really important because you want to have the full breadth of the investments that you can make from as many pots that are coming our way. So I definitely appreciate, and we can continue to work with our cities and towns on what that guidance will look like. I know that we already do have some towns that are working on different infrastructure projects with their ARPA funds, but then also, I mean, the theater block is a great example. How are we going to use public funds to leverage private investment? How are we going to make sure that all of our towns and cities come surging out of the pandemic with economic development and urban renewal plans and really make the quality of life better? And you get to do that when you have an influx of public funds that are geared to specific investments. And I think that is the narrative here, is how do we keep our country more competitive? How do we keep our communities with a high quality of life? How do we ensure that we're making investments that actually affect people? And to Jim's point earlier, making sure that government is working again and people can feel the results of government working again. So I feel like that was my close, more than answering the question.
So, look, on the ARPA monies, we're working with our individual cities and towns to try to figure out what fits and what fits within the criteria. I mean, obviously, if a community was thinking of, it needed to do something that actually qualifies under the ARPA formula, and they had already started to raise money for it, they can take the ARPA money and spend it on that, and then take the money that they saved and put it someplace else. So there's some flexibility here in how you can use it. But the important thing is to use it. You got 2 years to use it. And most of the communities that I'm dealing with the issue is not that they can't figure out how to spend it, it's they got too many things they want to spend it on.
Yeah.
And we're trying to, get to that balance. But understand this, there's also some state money. And we have, by the way, we in this area here, I think Laurie agrees, but we have an outstanding state legislative delegation. And they are working because the state has a big chunk of money that they can now funnel down to cities and towns. So there's additional money that could be utilized. And then you're going to get this infrastructure bill at some point, and I'm sure everybody has an infrastructure need, which is going to be helpful. And then hopefully we get this reconciliation bill. And again, all of this, I think, will be transformational. And when people say to me that, oh, well, it's too much money, understand this, even at the $3.5 trillion level, that's over 10 years. And on our defense budget, we spend something like $700 or $800 billion a year. All right, a year. So let's kind of put everything into perspective here. And for decades, we have underinvested in people. And so we need to change that equation. We want to be competitive economically. We have to have a well-trained workforce. We have to have kids that are going to be able to go to decent schools, get a first-class education. We need a healthcare system that works for everybody. I mean, all this stuff matters, and we have an opportunity to actually play catch-up. And so I hope we do it. So Roy and the North Central Chamber, thank you for inviting us here today. Thank you all for your, for the discussions that we're having here today. But we work as a team in our delegation. I mean, we all have different personalities and different backgrounds and different interests, but when we all work together, and that's really one of the great things about our delegation, and it's unique. We have some delegations in Congress, they may be all one party, they don't like each other. We actually like each other, right? And we want to make sure we have each other's back. So, whether it's in Fitchburg, which is technically not in my district, it's in Laurie's district, or whether it's in Leominster, which is in my district and not her district, if we can help each other out, we do. And the same goes for everybody else. And we work with the state legislative delegation, our mayors, and our local officials. And so I guess I'll just close by saying, for all the, I know I'm on TV, I can't say crap that's going on. But anyway, for all the,
I think you've done it before.
Yeah, all that's going on that you see on the news right now, some of it's overwhelming and it wears you down and it can be a little depressing. But I think we are hopeful that we're going to be able to do some things that will help in a real meaningful way our communities. So just shut the TV off and let's focus on getting things done. And even if we have different political opinions, you don't have to agree on everything to agree on something. When there's something we agree on, let's do it. The stuff we don't agree on, we'll fight about it. All right, thank you.
That's great. That's a wonderful note to end on. So I want to thank you both again. To Fitchburg State, our sponsor today, and I want to make sure you have some time to visit with your constituents here. And thank you all very much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks so much.